Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everybody. My name's Felicity Flack and I'm from the PHRN Program Office and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Today's webinar is going to be all about accessing cross-jurisdictional linked data in Australia. Australia continues to make great progress in linking and providing access to data from multiple jurisdictions. This is a complex endeavour which few federated countries have tackled. And we now have a coordinated approach which is continually being updated and refined. So today we have 4 speakers who together will give you an excellent summary of the current system and services and facilities available to assist you to access cross-jurisdictional linked data. So I hope you'll all find it a valuable session. We've allowed time for 1 or 2 questions after each speaker. And then more questions to the whole panel at the end of the session. So please write your questions in the question box at any time during the presentations, and we'll try and get through as many questions as we possibly can. So I'd like to welcome our first presenter, who's Natalie Wray, who's the Coordinator for Policy and Client Services and the PHRN Program Office, and she's going to talk about the online application system. So over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Felicity. Hi, I'm Natalie and I'm based in Perth at the PHRN Program Office. I'm going to talk about the online application system today and what data is currently available in Australia. So the best question I think to start with is, what's the best way to access cross-jurisdictional linked data in Australia? And the answer is the PHRN online application system. So, why would you use the PHRN online application system? The first thing, you'd use it to access administrative data in Australia. So to find out what data is available, you can go to the PHRN website and click on the For Researchers section and choose the data collections available from the drop-down menu. And you can search for what administrative data is available by data set and also by jurisdiction. One of the beauties of being able to search by data set is that it enables you to compare the availability and the date range of the core data collections which are held around the country in different health departments or other places. And we've also got Gantt charts available, so it's easily presented so you can see what the date ranges are for each collection. So you'd be looking at core data collections like birth data, death data, hospital admissions and ED presentations. They are available in the state and territory jurisdictions. And then you also might be wanting to access Commonwealth data, which is held at the AIHW. So you're looking at MBS, PBS, the National Death Index and the ACIR, so the immunisation register. And I've just made a little note on this slide as well that South Australia and the Northern Territory and Tasmania also accept the PHRN online application form for their single jurisdictional projects. But the majority of users will be using the online application system to access multi or cross-jurisdictional linked data. And I think the main reason to put an application into the online application system is because we have a coordinated network approach to managing your project. So when you lodge an application into the online application system, all the jurisdictional linkage units involved in your project will all receive the same form at the same time. And it also is the impetus for myself as the coordinator to organise a project planning meeting upon submission of your project, and then we'll be able to give you a coordinated feedback. And we also have a monitoring system for all the projects that are in the online application system, and we monitor them at a monthly meeting. So thinking about when you want to use the online application system, there's a couple of different reasons to use the online application system. The first one is to request a cost estimate. We've been getting a lot of researchers putting cost estimate requests in recently to get a rough idea of linkage costs and to assist with their budget preparations for grants and funding applications. Then the second reason you would use the online application system is part of your process of designing a linked data project. So by putting an expression of interest into the online application system, you're beginning your design phase of your project. So we can really be there to help you right at the beginning. And it's a good way of getting coordinated assistance and advice from the jurisdictional linkage units. And it does take a bit of time, but what their design process enables you to do is to get to an agreed position with all the linkage units about what data is involved in your project, what the linkage process will be like, how the data will flow, and like where the linked data will be stored and located at the end of your project. The final reason when you would use the online application system is to commence the application and approvals phase. So once the design phase is finished, you move into the application and approvals phase, where the jurisdictional linkage units are liaising with the data custodians on your behalf to get all the necessary approvals in place, and the researcher is also then going to ethics committees and working on those, getting those approvals in place. If you have an approved project in the online application system, you can also use the online application system to put an amendment in. And you can only do that for approved projects in the system, but an amendment you could, an amendment, it's useful because you don't have to redo a whole application form. You just have to, it duplicates the information that's already in the form, and then you can request a change or if you've got a new or modified purpose to the project, or you want to add an additional data set, or you want to apply for a data update of your existing data, that's when you would use the amendment. Okay, and just thinking about who can use the online application system. Anyone with an email address, and it's preferable if it's a university or research institute email address, or a government health department. Anyone can use the PHRN online application system. So anyone can register to be a registered user, but there are different types of users, and I'll just run through the different types now. The first one is the project owner, and this is the person who creates the project within the system, and this is the only person who can edit the online form. So there's the project owner, and then you've got your research team. And so you also have to register to be a user of the online application system, but then the project owner would list you under the researcher page as either a chief investigator or a contact person, analyst, collaborator, student. There's quite a few different roles that come under this blanket of researcher. And then these researchers can also view the online form and add comments to the form if the allow access box is checked by the project owner. And then we have jurisdictional linkage units. So every linkage unit in the network is a registered user of the online application system. They use the online application system to read your request for quote, your expression of interest. They use it to upload their cost estimates. They can provide feedback to researchers using the comments feature. And this is where they manage the approvals and agreements. So they can upload the data custodian approvals and also upload any agreements that have been signed in the agreement section. So how do you use the online application system? As I was just previously saying, everyone that uses the online application system needs to register. So it's an easy process. You just have to go to the online application system website. The address is up there, https://oas.phrn.org.au, and that will take you to the login page where you would click register as a new researcher. You complete all your details and then click register. And if you're going to be the project owner and you wanted to create a project, you would then land on the home page and click create to start a new project, and then you'll be directed to the summary page. The summary page has a number of fields in it that you would need to complete. These include things like the project title, project duration, project summary, project outline, who's the responsible organisation, the funder, if there's any conflicts of interest, and just the principal investigator and the contact person. You also need to select the application type on this page, and that would either be a request for quote or an expression of interest, and you would choose that from the drop-down menu. So you'd go through every page in the form, and so I've got the fields, the pages to be completed, which is the summary page. There's also the researcher page where you have to list all your project personnel. There's also a cohort selection page where you have to describe your cohort and your control group if you have one. There's also a data sets page where you have to indicate what data sets are going to be provided for linkage, any other sources of information such as researcher data set, or if you're linking or if you're requesting MBS and PBS data directly from Services Australia, for example. And there's also the question of how many data extractions will you be wanting for this project? Will it just be one-off, or will it be annual, or whatever? There's another page about privacy, and we're just wanting a little bit of more information about personal information required for the project and the consent process, and any consent forms if they've been used. There's the data management page, which is looking for information about where the data will be stored, your security plan, your data retention and disposal plan, and what analytical tools you're planning on using. There's also an approvals page, which has got what data custodian approvals will be required for the project, what ethics committees you need to lodge submissions with and get those approvals in place, and also there's a section for all other approvals. Some organisations have other approvals. Okay. So what happens next? You submit a project. If you're satisfied that you've provided enough information, you just click submit, and that'll cause the jurisdictional linkage units to get together to hold a meeting. At the meeting, they'll discuss a range of topics in relation to your project, such as what data sets are available, are the variables requested going to answer the research questions, is the data available for linkage, what linkage variables are available if the researcher is supplying the data set. And then you'll be getting feedback from the PHRN within 2 weeks if you're requesting a cost estimate, and between 4 to 6 weeks if you have lodged an EOI. And just be aware that with the EOI process, once you receive the feedback from the jurisdictional linkage units, the form can go back and forth while jurisdictional linkage units ask for a little bit more information, and you might have some more questions. So it will move back and forth. And then once the design phase is complete, the EOI will then transition to an application, and then the linkage units will be focused on approaching all the data custodians and getting all the approvals in place for your project. So just remember, there's lots of information on the PHRN website. There's an email address. You can contact me through the email or by telephone to discuss your project or project ideas. Okay, thanks, Felicity.
Thanks, Natalie. Thank you very much for that helpful presentation. We haven't received any questions yet, but I would like to remind everybody that if you do have any questions for any of our speakers, just to type your question into the question box, and we'll have another opportunity at the end of the webinar to have all of the speakers back for a bit of a panel discussion. So there'll be opportunity for questions for Natalie if you think of some as the presentations proceed. So thank you very much, Natalie. And we're going to move on to our second speaker now. Do you want to turn? Yep. Which is Katie Irvine, who's the manager of the Centre for Health Record Linkage, otherwise known as Cheryl, at New South Wales. And Katie's going to talk to us about the role of a state data linkage unit in accessing cross-jurisdictional data. So welcome, Katie, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Felicity. So the PHRN has state and territory data linkage units that cover all of Australia. I'm from New South Wales and ACT, which have together created the Centre for Health Record Linkage. South Australia and Northern Territory have banded together into Sant Data Link, and there's units that cover the rest of the country. We're all a little bit different, but broadly our functions are similar. We all provide an advisory service, and that's about providing advice on the cost, the design of a project and approvals as you work a project up. We may perform feasibility assessments on the project if we need to, on your behalf or for data custodians or ethics committees. And the client services team is really your advocate for the project and will keep an eye on it from sort of start to finish when you're provisioned the data. Each of us in the states and territories maintain a data linkage system, which is where we routinely link within and across different data collections that are generally from the state and territory. We tend to focus on the frequently used data collections. So that might include links at a person level across numerous collections, or links at a family level as well, so that you can study the influence of parental factors on child development, for example, or choose siblings as controls. If you can see the slides, the next slide shows just an example of the linkage system from New South Wales and ACT. We call it a master linkage key, and we do use different terminology across states and territories. But essentially, we have 28 data sets that are linked together with nearly 200 million records in them, and that gets updated on a regular basis. And we opportunistically add new data sets to that over time. This is a much more timely and cost-effective way of approaching linkage because we link the data together in advance of it being requested for research. And that pre-linked data can be leveraged for cross-jurisdictional studies, and we can send parts of that system to the AIHW, for example, to be linked to Commonwealth data. Over time, we have linked about 200 other data sets to that system or parts of that system for research. And theoretically, we say we can link anything to these systems, but it does require data custodian sign-off and ethics approval, and obviously linkable, accessible data. So back to the general functions. Of course, there's that additional linkage on request I just spoke about. And we also, of course, have a role in enabling cross-jurisdictional linkage. We support the PHRN online system and the advice to researchers through that network. And we share data as we need to with the National Data Linkage Unit, the AIHW, or with other state and territory data linkage units to support cross-jurisdictional work. So when you use the PHRN online application system, the state and territory linkage units will be there behind the scenes, perhaps uploading cost estimates or working with other data linkage centres to design a data linkage process and flow that will enable your project to occur. And then we will take up the process of working with you on jurisdictional approvals. I just wanted to show you a couple of data linkage data flow diagrams to give you a sense of what it is we're designing and what we are thinking about when we do that. This first one was a UNSW project linking quite a long birth cohort from New South Wales and WA to state-based data on infectious diseases or vaccine preventable diseases in this instance, hospitalisations, emergency visits and pathology data, as well as Commonwealth held immunisation data and deaths. Sorry, I've just lost my slides. There we go. This is not necessarily a complicated study, but what the diagram shows is what pre-existing linked data will be leveraged by the states and sent to the Commonwealth, and what the AIHW will do to bring that data together. And the kinds of considerations we have when working with the other data linkage units to design this is the source data available for the time series you want? Is the data available in an identified form of sufficient quality to do the work? Will this proposal meet all of the legislative and policy compliance obligations that we have? and they are numerous, but that is something we will consider in designing it. Do we think this flow will get approved easily? Is this feasible? And is it efficient? I've got a second example, which is a little bit more complicated. And it's not the detail I want to show you here, but just to make you understand that when we talk about design, we don't want to design your research. We want to design a data flow that will enable your research and that will tick these kind of boxes. We have talked about feasibility assessment there, and really our goal is not to say no to projects, but to flag areas of high risk, areas where there may be no precedent, there may be a risk to policy compliance, where there might be an easier way to get something done. So my next set of slides is around obtaining approval. So once we've been through a design phase, the next step is really to get the approvals you need. And when you submit that online form to the jurisdictions for review, our client services officers in the state and territory will help you to obtain jurisdictional approvals. They differ in each jurisdiction, and the jurisdictions do have some different requirements, and so that local expertise can help you to navigate that process a little more easily. What we're looking at is, does our data linkage unit itself have any requirements? What custodian approvals or governance approvals do you need? And do you need ethics approval in the jurisdiction? And here's the good news I've been waiting 5 years to share. From May this year, specialist HRECs are able to provide approval of some health data linkage projects, drawing on the National Mutual Acceptance Scheme. What this does is mean that for the jurisdictions I've listed, specialist nominated committees from any of those jurisdictions can review applications that involve those jurisdictions. There are some exemptions in place for things like justice data, for example, and some of us amongst the jurisdictions are still implementing our processes to make this happen. But theoretically, this will drastically reduce the number of HREC approvals you would need to obtain to do cross-jurisdictional linked data research. There is some more information on the PHRN website. There's a link there. And I would encourage you, if you're interested, to contact any of the data linkage units to talk about how to take advantage of this and when is the right time to be seeking to use it. So once the approvals are in place, the state and territory data linkage units have a role in collaborating to pull that data together that's been approved. So what we do is follow the approved linkage process and data flow that is in your data linkage application and approved documentation. And we have to follow quite closely the approved documentation. That might mean that we are sourcing data from somewhere and linking it at a state level. It may mean that we are extracting already linked data and sending it to another data linkage unit who will also do some further linkage on it. And then that linked data will be provisioned through whatever access mechanism has been approved by the data custodians and the ethics committee. That could be through a secure remote access environment like the SHORE, or it could be through an alternate mechanism. The timeframes for this work can vary, and in my experience can be a little bit unpredictable. So before you hire a new statistician or analyst, I would encourage you to work with your contact at the PHRN Program Office or another place to really understand what needs to be delivered to make this happen, and at what point in the process can the network give you some guidance on how long we expect that this might take. We do meet monthly to review the status of all of these projects. So we're tracking where they're up to and trying to identify any issues that need to be resolved along the way. So you are able to obtain a status update that will cover the entire country and all the jurisdictions participating in your project. That's it from me, and I'll open up for any questions.
Okay, hi, thanks, Katie. I do have one question that I think you can probably answer. This one is, who can apply for data through the DLUs? Can social and health services themselves apply for linked administrative data for their current or previous clients, for example?
Yes, they can. So we do lots of work with, say, government agencies who may offer a particular kind of service to a disadvantaged population, or, you know, even to an advantaged one. And the project design might be to take that group of people, however large, and link that to numerous data sets in a retrospective and prospective way to look at, you know, historical risk factors or baseline characteristics of people, baseline service usage, and also to follow up people over time. And another design element might be then to select some kind of comparison group and obtain that same information so that you can compare those people over time. So we see applications from not just academics, but also from government agencies in health and social services, also in the transport sector, for example. We see applications from NGOs quite regularly. And of course the medical research institutes. And often we see applications that are a collaboration of all of those partners working together.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Katie. And I think we'll move on to our next presenter. We'll get you back in a minute. Okay, our next presenter is Phil Anderson, who's the head of the Health Linkage Unit at the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare Data Integration Services Centre. And Phil's going to talk about the AIHW's role in access to cross-jurisdictional data for researchers. Welcome, Phil.
Sorry, I'm just right. Is that right, Felicity?
Yes, looks good, Phil.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I'm going to give an overview of AIHW processes and our role in national data linkage, the main sets that we have that can be linked, and how we work with the state linkage units, which you've already heard of a bit from Katie, and hopefully what we are doing to build a better national linkage system. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare has been carrying out data linkage since the mid-1990s, and we've had a dedicated data linkage unit since about 2010. Since 2012, we've been authorised as an integrating authority for the integration of Commonwealth data under the high-level principles for that integration. This means that we've got, you know, our environment, infrastructure, data governance, expertise, security and privacy culture, all have been assessed and endorsed. Under the principles, a responsible integrating authority must be nominated for each data linkage project which involves Commonwealth data. And in particular, we have arrangements with the Departments of Health and Social Services. At the same time, we are the National Linkage Unit in the Population Health Research Network. And as I said, working closely with the state linkage units. So we're playing a major role in bringing together Commonwealth and state data. Linkage at the AIHW is carried out by the Data Integration Services Centre, DISC, on a separate secure system. All linkage projects must be approved by the AIHW Ethics Committee, and that's sort of bound by the AIHW Act. The first stage for linking Commonwealth data, perhaps after you've submitted your online application in the PHRN system, but for us is the completion of a technical assessment assisted by the DISC Client Services team Similarly, our client service team will help you all through the process to get approvals necessary. That technical assessment is signed off by DISC and is included in the ethics application, so there's no duplication of effort between the two. We then facilitate approval by the appropriate Commonwealth data custodians. That's usually in the form of a public interest certificate called a PIC. And you may, of course, require other ethics and data custodian approvals. Other national data sets, which are not Commonwealth sourced, have different specific process for approval, and we can also assist with that. Most projects involving Commonwealth data require the use of a secure access environment, such as SURE, which Matt will talk about after me. But briefly, as part of considering the risks around linkage projects, AIHW have adopted the 5 safes model. We've really been operating under this model for a long time, but we've formalised it under this framework. And it's also used by the Department of Health and the ABS and more generally, so it becomes a general reference framework. And under those protocols, by the use of a secure environment with AIHW monitoring of output, that enables large detailed Commonwealth unit record data to be accessed for research projects. And just to let, if you want to know more about our application process, please see our web pages for data linkage, and that's the address there. So the Institute holds or can access a number of Commonwealth data sets and national data sets. Primarily the Medicare Benefit Schedule, MBS, includes information about MBS claims, service events, service care providers, codes and address. The Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, PBS, of course, includes PBS scripts and payments, patients, prescribers and dispensing pharmacies. Now, you may be able to get this data from the former Department of Human Services, now Services Australia, if you have a fully consented study under their model. But if you do not have consent and you need a waiver of consent, then you'll have to use the Institute currently for linkage of those data sets. There's also the Australian Immunisation Register. Sorry, I should say both the MBS and PBS are linked using the Medicare Consumer Directory, which was previously the Medicare enrolment file. That means that they can be done in one linkage. So if you're linking to both from another data set, it's only one linkage step. The Domino data set, which I have to read out because it stands for Data Over Multiple Individual Occurrences, from the Department of Social Services, provides a longitudinal picture of the interaction of individuals with DSS payments. We've only had this one for the last couple of years. It contains information on recipients' demographics, benefits history, concessions, education where available, and housing. The National Aged Care Data Clearinghouse is a large, complex collection that includes data on all Commonwealth aged care programs, and there's quite a number of those now, which we regularly link together, so it's got its own sort of aged care spine. The Institute is authorised to release data from this collection. The National Cancer Screening Registry has been set up only recently, and access arrangements are still being finalised, but it includes bowel and cervical cancer screening currently. We've also got a range of national data collections under various arrangements with the relevant contributing state and territory or other data custodians. These include the National Death Index, that is fact and cause of death for all Australians since 1984. The Australian Cancer Database, for which we do an annual linkage to create a person-based data set and work with the state cancer registries on that. I should say the NDI only requires an AIHW ethics approval to be accessed under our arrangements with the registrars. And we also link a number of other data sets. You can see we've got a range of community services data. All these data sets can be linked with state data, and as I said, the Institute works closely with the PHRN data linkage units on such projects. Generally, these involve linkage of various data sets at the state level, as Katie showed in her examples, and then the Institute linking the state cohort to the national data set. We've done a lot of these projects, and they've been successfully undertaken, and the number is growing rapidly. I estimate we have about 80 on our books at the moment, between various stages between application and data delivery. All approved projects are listed on our website if you're interested in those, and I've actually got the same example as Cheryl. So this is a typical example of a linkage between the state data and Commonwealth data. And most of the projects, I'd have to say, that we've done to date usually do only involve one or two states linking to Commonwealth data, because that is possibly an easier pathway. The big challenge has remained, and that is still, I think, undertaking, like, say, a complex cross-jurisdictional data linkage project, maybe a truly national project, for example, involving hospital data, or even one that involves a lot of jurisdictions. There are still barriers to achieving this and difficulties in doing it. So where AIHW is working a number of ways to build systems to overcome these. At our end, DISC is moving from a one-off project-by-project linkage, which the Commonwealth principles were originally based on, and to now undertaking systemic linkages and constructing ongoing linkage maps, resulting in large gains in efficiency, more similar to the state linkage systems. We're now able to use the Medicare Consumer Directory as the basis of a national linkage map, and thus a linkage spine for any project. This file includes everyone enrolled in Medicare since 1984, including their name and address history, which is quite powerful for linkage. It's about 31 million people, alive and deceased, and about 43 million names. It can be used to increase the accuracy of linkage even when MBS or PBS data is not included. And it's currently regularly linked to the National Death Index. And now we're working with a number of the states on testing arrangements to simplify data flows for projects involving state and Commonwealth data, and aligning this national linkage map with the state linkage systems. In parallel to this, the Institute's involved in developing a number of ongoing linked data collections, which we're now terming MELDAs, short for multi-source enduring linked data assets. The National Integrated Health Services Information Analysis Asset, or NISI, involves the linkage of MBS, PBS, NDI, residential aged care, and admitted patient, emergency department, and some outpatient data from now 6 states and territories. In the first instance, this is being made available to government researchers just recently, but there have been delays in achieving access for other researchers, as was initially planned. We've been faced with a number of technology challenges relating to the size of the data set and its complex government requirements. However, we are starting to reuse the associated linkage structure for some approved projects. The National Disability Data Asset is now underway with a series of 5 test projects with different states involving the linkage of Commonwealth data to a range of state data. It includes the first linkage of the Domino data set I talked about to Medicare, which could become a powerful element of our linkage map. An ongoing cancer data set called CantLink has also been approved, and I think one for diabetes is planned. And all these developments are serving as building blocks in increasing the feasibility and efficiency of cross-jurisdictional linkage, and we expect to progress this further over the next year or two. Thanks, I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Phil. We are having quite a number of questions come through, but I think quite a few of them it would be helpful if all of our panelists were available to answer them. So perhaps we'll leave it there for you, Phil, and we'll move on to our final presentation. So thank you very much, Phil. And we'll move on to our final presenter, who is Matt Gorringe, who's the Program Manager of the Secure Unified Research Environment, the SURE, at the Sax Institute. Welcome, Matt, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Felicity. That's good. I'll just confirm you can see my presentation. I'm going to talk about the need for virtual laboratories and how SURE works in the context of accessing cross-jurisdictional data. I'd like to say that SURE was developed by the Sax Institute and is operated as part of the PHRN with funding from NCRIS and the New South Wales Government. So the need for virtual laboratories or secure virtual laboratories. Really, they're there to enable data custodians and ethics committees to approve data for research and to approve the release of data. They address many of the legislative requirements and control some of the risks that remain when releasing health data. So, of course, the release of data must comply with, for instance, the Privacy Act, but also with a range of state and territory legislation and with a range of regulations or policies that each data custodian might put in place to protect the privacy of the people whose records are being released. So despite methods of data linkage that protect privacy, the possibility of re-identification remains with any de-identified data, and that forms the basis of many of the sort of controls that we put in place to protect privacy. Obviously, the potential impact of disclosure of health data would be very significant for individuals whose records might be disclosed, and also for the future availability of data for research. So how do virtual laboratories enable data release and support it? First of all, a secure data laboratory will prevent data being copied from the laboratory to other locations, such as hard drives on laptops, removable media that's unsecured. Obviously, this is to prevent accidental disclosure. Of course, access controls are very important, and this goes back to the 5 safes, right people. So a secure laboratory will make sure that individual researchers are approved by the appropriate custodians and ethics committees prior to access to the data being granted. A good laboratory will ensure data separation is maintained between research projects so that 2 projects can't combine their data where that's not approved by an ethics committee or the custodian. A laboratory will allow chief investigators to review and custodians to review summary data before it's removed from the environment, and this is primarily used to address issues of statistical disclosure, and the human in the loop here is really, really important. Many data custodians, as a condition of release, do say that they will need to have one of their staff review summary data prior to publication, just to make sure there's no statistical disclosure. And of course, chief investigators also want to be able to review the work of their teams prior to that information being removed from the environment. User training and communication to assist researchers discharge their responsibilities is really important. It's training normally that would include both the use of the system, but also some basic principles of how to keep the data secure and how to avoid falling victim, I guess, to common methods of attack such as phishing. And of course, a virtual laboratory will provide logging of file access, of user access, and sometimes even where custodians request it or need it, of keystroke logging and user behaviour to just be assured that the data is being used appropriately and in line with the approvals for the project. Of course, virtual laboratories can offer things to researchers they might not have otherwise, and one of those is these are normally remote access environments, and that means you can access them from home, you can access them from work, and generally you can access them from anywhere with the security features being built into the environment rather than the computer that's accessing the environment. They can give researchers the ability to collaborate with researchers in different institutions and sometimes even overseas while still complying with the requirements for the release of data, and I'll mention that when I talk about SURE. Most environments can access cloud computing, and this obviously is about getting more power in the environment and for researchers to complete complex analyses and to work on very large data sets. And of course, virtual laboratories offer secure backup of data. So SURE, the Secure Unified Research Environment and how it works, we provide project-specific workspaces that are accessed remotely using Citrix through virtual machines from any desktop. Each workspace has its own security perimeter, and this is about data separation. So there's no way of moving data between different projects. The virtual machines that we have for analysis, I think at the moment we offer virtual machines on our servers up to 12 cores and 128 gigabytes of RAM. And traditionally, all the storage and analysis happens on dedicated SURE servers and storage devices that we operate in a secure commercial data centre. They're owned by us and they're in a locked cage there in a data centre. We have now tested the ability to access AWS Cloud for high performance burst computing. This is a hybrid cloud model that we've put in place where the data is still stored on our own storage devices, but we go to AWS in a secure way to get much bigger computing than we could manage with our own servers, and that can include high performance computing as well for people who need it. And one of the real key features of SURE is that, you know, the control around the ingress and egress of data from the environment is managed through the curated gateway, and I'll spend a bit of time on that now. It's a purpose-built application. It's the only way for files to get in and out of SURE. It does provide a system for review where files can be opened and reviewed by the custodian or by the chief investigator, and they can be either approved for import or export from the environment, they can be rejected, or they can be flagged for further information required from researchers. And of course, all files that pass through the curated gateway are logged, and this gives custodians a real sense of security that any activities are monitored. The features of SURE, it's been around since 2011. We've got about 450 researchers using it at the moment. Our information security management systems are ISO 27001 accredited, and we're going through an audit at the moment. This is important because it means we say what we say, we do what we say we do with our information security management system. It means that we're always looking for potential weaknesses in the environment, and we have established methods of making improvements to the security management of the environment. We've got very robust multi-factor authentication for login that prevents unauthorised users from being able to access the data or the environment. We do regular penetration testing by independent experts, and of course we deliver that training online for all users of the SURE environment to ensure that people do understand their responsibilities and how to keep themselves and the data they use safe. So accessing SURE, I would say contact SURE when making an application to access data. Each of the data linkage nodes, if you're applying through the online application system across jurisdictional data, will know whether their custodians require the use of SURE. You may need to discuss the use of SURE with data custodians as well, where that's required. Of course, we've got a website with a lot of information about how to use SURE, and I'd just say that as standard, we supply our virtual machines with SAS, Data, SPSS and R, but we also allow the use of lots of non-standard applications, particularly relational database systems like SQL, and lots of people now using geographical systems like ArcGIS. So there's my contact details, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. That was fantastic. Now, we have quite a lot of questions, so there's clearly a lot of things that people want to know. So perhaps I'll ask Matt one or two questions while I ask the rest of the presenters to turn on their cameras, and we'll see how we go. But if the presenters are okay, we might run a few minutes over time. Everyone okay with that?
Sure.
So Matt, we'll start with what I hope is an easy one. Is it now possible to work in the shore from overseas?
Thanks for that. That's a great thing to talk about. It's always been possible to work inshore from overseas, and that is because the data, when you're working inshore, remains on the servers here in Australia. So the data is not shipped overseas, it remains in Australia, and because of all of those controls, somebody can safely access it. So we've had lots of overseas collaborators in the past.
Okay, great. And just one more for you, Matt, before we move on to some other topics. When data goes to AWS, does it meet Australian legislative requirements, such as access to Australian data by foreign government?
Yes. This is why we don't store. For one thing, we've gone to a hybrid cloud model, so we're not storing data on AWS. We're using AWS in Australia on servers in Australia, not AWS overseas.
Okay, great, thanks. The next question relates a bit to all of you. I've heard rumours that I'm better off doing the applications myself, sort of individually to Cheryl and AIHW, than to go through the PHRN. There are concerns that it's much slower to go through the PHRN. How do you respond to that? Do you want to start, Natalie? The others might want to jump in.
I'm sorry you've heard those rumours. I've heard some rumours to the opposite of that, saying that people are really happy with the process that the PHRN is providing. Yes, you're right. If you do go through the PHRN online application system, you'll still be asked to do some jurisdictional specific forms. It won't be just the one form that you'll be asked to complete, but what you're getting from using the online application system is a coordinated approach. I don't think it's, well, from my point of view, I wouldn't say it's longer. You're having the jurisdictional linkage units coming together to talk about your project all at the same time. I'd be very surprised if that happens between the linkage units if you apply to each linkage unit directly, because I think if you do that, each jurisdictional linkage unit will take it as a jurisdiction specific only project. Katie, do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, look, I would say that the PHRN processes have improved a lot over time, and I think the experience that people might have had a couple of years ago going through the PHRN is far different than what you would have now going through it. And there's been a concerted effort over a couple of years to really tighten that up and streamline how that works. I do think the value of it increases the more different jurisdictions are in the mix. So that coordination is obviously, the need for it is higher with more jurisdictions kind of in the process. Phil, do you have any comments from your side?
Yes, I'd agree with that. We've particularly found useful the meetings that happen for each application, particularly where it's very complex. It's still quite possible if you're maybe only involving 2 linkage units for that sort of liaison to happen, but once you have a number of units involved, it's much easier to go through a central process.
Okay, thanks guys. We've also had quite a few questions about cost. people are interested in how costs are determined and, unsurprisingly, examples of what things might cost. So who wants to take that one first?
Well, I'll start. Our costs are based on cost recovery, and that is based on the amount of work that we think we'll need to undertake to do your project. We don't base it on the number of records in particular, it's the amount of time that we know it'll take based on our previous experience. It's very hard to give a cost because projects range so much from a simple linkage of a cohort to the National Death Index to a multi, file complex linkage process with, control groups and so forth. So, but that's our basis for our costs.
Matt, you had your hand up there?
Yeah, thanks. Again, it's a cost recovery basis that we operate under, and a typical project with 2 researchers might cost about $9,000 in the first year and about $7,000 every year after that.
Katie, did you want to add anything about cost?
No, probably similar to Phil. There's a huge variation, so we wouldn't even provide an average cost because we see, things from $2,000 to $50,000 or more. But it's very much about the workload it takes to deliver that. And I would say it's partial cost recovery. I would say that the government is subsidising this to a fair degree, and we're not recouping everything it takes to deliver the piece of work.
Cool. And for Natalie, just a specific question about cost. What's the cost involved in using the PHRN online application system?
Oh, look, you'll be pleased to know there's no cost at the moment to using the online application system.
Right. Some things in life are free.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Okay, what else have we got here? There have been a couple of more sort of NMA type questions for Katie. Don't know whether you want to, well, the first one is, could you please explain more about exemptions for NMA in relation to justice data and other relevant types of data? You got anything else you can add about that,
Look,
Katie?
if I explained it, I'd be reading it off the guidance material on the PHRN website. That is the extent of my familiarity with those exemptions. So I apologise for that, and please do look at the material. We did fight really hard to have that as broad as possible, but it just wasn't possible to put every single type of data linkage study under the NMA banner.
Yes, and I would say we have been trying to get together a special webinar on NMA, and hopefully we'll manage to get the right people on a webinar to perhaps address some of those more detailed issues about NMA in the future. So watch this space for some more NMA stuff. But what else have we got? This is a question, but sort of for Katie, but Phil, you might want to jump in as well. How up to date are the data sets? How long of a delay between hospital admissions and when they are available to be linked? So that's about hospital admissions, but you might want to make comments about data collections more generally. Perhaps do you want to go first, Phil, and talk about the delay between the data that you have and...
Yeah, well, we now have an arrangement with the Department of Health to extract data for MBS and PBS, and hopefully the immunisation register very shortly, directly from their enterprise data warehouse. So that means we get the most up-to-date data. PBS data is generally, it does have a delay in its actual recording of scripts, so that's a different issue. So they're the main data sets. Other data sets tend to be annual collections, so that they may be, it varies depending upon the data.
Katie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, specifically on hospitals, for New South Wales, there's a disconnect between the public and private hospitals. So private hospital data may come annually, whereas public hospital data provisioned to us every 6 weeks for linkage. In terms of using it for analysis, the best possible outcome really is that it's available about 3 months after the end of a quarter. And sometimes that can be, say, 6 months, depending on what happens by the time you get it. But part of that is because of the ICD coding of diagnosis and procedures. So ICD coding of diagnosis may occur after a person leaves hospital. And so the department allows time for hospitals to enter ICD codes for diagnosis and procedure after a person leaves. And so we allow a little bit of time for the records to mature and be fully enumerated on procedure and diagnosis codes, which is why there's that delay. For very unusual projects, we can actually link to people who are currently in hospital, but of course then they're lacking that sort of information such as coded diagnosis and procedure that is generally used for research. But all data collections in the system move at their own frequency, and some of it is dictated by the data custodian. Cancer incidence and mortality is produced as an annual file, and the timing of that is dictated by the Cancer Institute who manage the data collection. If you have a project that requires data more current than what you see on our website or what is routinely available, I would encourage you to talk to us, because we have been able to make a case for obtaining a special feed for a particular project if there's a really good rationale for it. We've done some work with near real-time death data linkage, for example, and that sort of need can be there for patient recruitment studies where you need really up-to-date information in order to trigger an action, say to recruit a patient.
Okay, all right.
And Felicity, sorry, I was just going to say also that's one thing that when the linkage units get together and discuss a project when an EOI comes in, that's some of the feedback that we do give to researchers about what data is available, the time lags between the data becoming available for linkage. So the researcher is aware of that very, like 6 weeks after they put in an expression of interest.
Sure. This is a question for Matt. It's a little long. In research, it's best practice to use a version control for data analysis code, for example, Git. In addition, many journals or grants now require any analysis code to be made openly available to aid in reproducibility. How do secure research environments accommodate collaborative version control tools hosted on a secure server in research institutions, for example, self-managed instances of GitLab?
It's a tough one. We can and have on request set up GitHub and GitLab, so that's fine. But of course, the issue with code is just can the code be removed from the environment? And the answer is yes. That depends on the data custodian and other approval. But normally, you would think for almost all projects, as long as the code doesn't contain references to individual records, there would be nothing to stop it being removed and provided to the journal.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're at 5 minutes over time now, so I think we should probably wrap up. But thank you so much to all of our speakers, to Natalie, to Katie, to Matthew and Phil. And to let you all know that a recording of these presentations will be available on the PHRN YouTube channel shortly. You should all receive an email to let you know when that's available, and to keep an eye on the PHRN emails and newsletters and website to hear when the next webinars are coming up. Thank you, everybody.